The first bullet took the horse. The second shattered the lantern, plunging the yard into absolute darkness. Elijah Gray slid silently away from the animal's still warm body, his hand clutching not a six-shooter, but a crumpled telegram. 3 words. He found you. Now, huddled in the cold barn on the outskirts of a ranch that wasn't his, he knew the running was over. 3 years, 7 names, and 1,000 miles were now worthless. The hunter was on his scent, and the only thing left was to turn from prey into predator, or die. He arrived in the San Miguel Valley like a ghost, materializing from the dust and heat haze on a tired, worn-out mare. He carried a single rifle and the faint, carefully buried echoes of a past that clung to him like a shadow. Old Man Mendoza, owner of the most failing spread in the county, hired him more out of pity than any real need for hands. The Crossroads Ranch was as godforsaken as Elijah himself. Sun-bleached buildings, sparse pasture, and an air of quiet desperation that hung in the dry air. He made no effort to connect. He worked from first light until the stars pricked the velvet sky, performing his duties in silence, deflecting any questions with a grunt or a vacant stare. His eyes, the color of old gunmetal, were perpetually fixed on the distant horizon, as if he expected something or someone to emerge from the shimmering heat at any moment. At night, he lay on his cot in the tack room, listening to the rusty groan of the weather vane on the barn roof. Every creak, every snap of a twig outside, sent his hand instinctively reaching for the worn stock of the rifle hanging above his head. His peace, a fragile and fleeting thing, was found in a deep canyon at the far edge of Mendoza's land. There, hidden by towering walls of red rock, with the steady murmur of a creek as his only company, he would sometimes allow himself to close his eyes. For a minute, he could almost forget the man he had been and the relentless specter that followed him. The work was hard, mindless, and perfect. It was a repair of 1,000 broken fences, the digging of post holes in sun-baked earth that fought back, the endless hauling of water for stock from a well that seemed to sigh with each bucket drawn. His muscles ached in a way that was clean, a physical pain that could, for a few hours, overshadow the deeper, more persistent ache inside. The other hands left him alone after the first few attempts at conversation were met with monosyllabic replies or simply silence. They called him the loner or that quiet fella, their curiosity eventually giving way to indifference. He preferred it that way. Every person was a potential leak, a pair of eyes that could report a description, a loose tongue that could mention a stranger with a certain set to his shoulders, a particular way of moving. He was a closed book, and he intended to keep the cover nailed shut. His past was a locked box, and he had thrown away the key. Only in the canyon did he ever come close to opening it. The walls of the canyon rose around him like a fortress, the stratified layers of rock telling a story of millennia, a timeline that made his own short, violent life seem insignificant. The creek water was cold and clear, a shock to the system that pulled him into the present moment. He would sit on a smooth, sun-warmed boulder, his back against the stone, and just listen. The wind whispered through the scrub oak and juniper, a different sound from the empty, mournful howl it made across the open plains. Here it was a companion, a soft voice that asked no questions. He would watch the hawks circling high above on the thermal currents, their cries echoing in the vast space, and for a fleeting moment, he would feel a connection to something greater than his own fear. But the peace never lasted. A shadow moving too quickly, the sudden scuttle of a lizard, the unnatural fall of a stone. Any small thing could snap him back. The hair on the back of his neck would prickle, his breathing would slow, and his eyes would scan the high rim of the canyon, searching for a silhouette against the bright blue sky. He was always waiting, always listening. The hunter was out there, a man whose face he had never clearly seen, but whose presence he felt in his bones, a cold certainty that had dogged his steps across 3 states. He knew it was only a matter of time. The telegram, now a soft pulp in his pocket from being handled so often, was the final proof. The world, which he had tried so hard to shrink to the size of this forgotten ranch, was closing in again. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The canyon, his sanctuary, was also a potential trap, with only one easy way in or out. He started varying his routes, approaching from different directions, his eyes constantly checking his back trail. The paranoia, which had once been a background hum, was now a constant, screaming siren in his mind. He started sleeping with his rifle tucked beside him on the cot, the cold metal a grim comfort. The weight of the waiting was worse than any confrontation. It was a slow, grinding tension that wore away at his nerves, each sunrise a reprieve and each sunset a threat. He was a spring being coiled too tight, and he knew that sooner or later he would have to break or be released with violent force. The morning broke still and silent, the kind of deep quiet that felt heavy and wrong. Elijah noticed the absence first. The familiar sounds of old man Mendoza puttering around the main house, the clang of the coffee pot, the soft whistle he always used for the old dog. None of it came. The ranch was preternaturally still. He found the dark stain on the worn wooden planks of the barn entrance not with panic, but with a cold, sinking dread that settled in his gut like a stone. It was dried blood, a rusty brown Rorschach test telling a story of violence he had slept through. There had been no cry, no gunshot to shatter the night. The silence of the act was more terrifying than any noise. A professional chill settled over him, the kind he had not felt in years, as his mind shifted from a man hiding to a predator assessing a threat. He moved through the property with a methodical, detached precision, his eyes scanning every detail. The main house was undisturbed, Mendoza's bed unslept in. The corral was empty, the livestock strangely calm. There were no signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings, no drag marks in the dust. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the old rancher whole, leaving only that one dark testament on the threshold. It was by the well, in a patch of soft, damp earth sheltered from the wind, that he found it. A single footprint. It was not his own worn, practical boot, nor was it Mendoza's heavy, flat-soled work shoe. This print was different. It was made from fine, supple leather, the sole elegantly crafted with a subtle, intricate pattern. The impression was clean, deep, and perfectly placed, as if its owner had stood there for some time, contemplating the view. There was no urgency in its making, no scuff or slip. The hunter hadn't been running or searching frantically. He had been strolling. The realization hit Elijah with more force than a physical blow. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a game of cat and mouse, where the cat was so confident it didn't bother to hide its claws. He, Elijah Gray, a man who had survived betrayals and gunfights and the harshness of the frontier, was being toyed with. The feeling of being a veteran, a lone wolf who relied only on himself, evaporated, replaced by the chilling vulnerability of a boy backed into a corner by a larger, unseen bully. A cold fury began to burn alongside the fear, a dangerous combination. He spent the remainder of the daylight hours in a flurry of futile activity, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control. He barricaded the door to the tack room with a heavy crate, stacked sacks of feed against the window, and checked and rechecked the load in his rifle. He knew, with a grim certainty, that these preparations were pathetic, like stacking twigs against a coming storm. He was fortifying a position against a ghost, a man who could enter and exit a property without a sound, leaving only a single mocking footprint as his calling card. The actions were not about true defense. They were about staving off the feeling of utter helplessness. As full darkness fell, he took up a post by the small, grimy window, the cold weight of the rifle a familiar comfort on his knees. The moon was a pale sliver, offering little light. The landscape was a sea of black and deeper black. He sat for hours, his body tense, his ears straining for any sound beyond the usual chorus of crickets and the sigh of the wind. Then he saw it. On the crest of a distant hill, silhouetted against the slightly less dark sky, was a single figure on horseback. It was motionless, a stark, dark cutout against the night. It didn't move, didn't approach. It simply existed there, a silent, watching sentinel. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. His knuckles turned white on the rifle stock. He stared until his eyes ached, trying to discern any detail, any feature. But the distance and the darkness revealed nothing. The figure remained for several long, agonizing minutes. a statue of pure menace. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it was gone. It had not been a threat of immediate violence. It was something far worse. It was a message, delivered with chilling clarity across the vast, empty landscape. I am here. I am watching you. The game was indeed on, and Elijah had just been reminded he was nothing but a piece on the board. The next morning, driven by a need for normalcy and to check the traps he had set for coyotes, Elijah ventured out into the scrubland at the edge of the property. The air was still and thick with tension, every rustle of grass sounding like a footstep. It was in a narrow draw, sheltered by a jagged outcrop of rocks, that he found her. She lay half-curled in the scant shade, unconscious. Her shoulder was a mess of dark, dried blood, staining the expensive, practical fabric of her shirt. One arm lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Even in her state, pale and dust-covered, there was an undeniable sharpness to her features, a latent strength in the line of her jaw that spoke of a life far removed from the domestic. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to leave this complication for the vultures. Trouble had found her, and trouble was the last thing he needed. But the sight of her, left to die in the wilderness, struck a chord deeper than his caution. With a grunt of effort, he lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, but solid. He carried her back to the relative safety of the tack room, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He laid her on his cot and set to work with a grim efficiency born of necessity. He cleaned the gunshot wound on her shoulder, the bullet having passed cleanly through, and fashioned a splint for her broken arm from a piece of scrap wood and strips torn from a blanket. As he worked, he searched her. In the pocket of her trousers, he found a small, deadly .32 caliber revolver, its pearl handle cool and smooth. Tucked into her boot was an elegant, needle-thin stiletto. These were not the tools of a traveler. They were the instruments of a professional. He sat back on a crate, his rifle within easy reach, and waited. The sun climbed higher, painting bright stripes of light across the dusty floor. She came to with a soft, pained groan, her body tensing before her eyes even opened. When they did, they were dark, sharp, and impossibly alert. They took in the room, the rough bandages on her shoulder and arm, and finally, the man sitting across from her, in a single, comprehensive sweep. There was no panic, only a swift, calculating assessment. She introduced herself as Isabella, her voice raspy but steady. She did not bother with lies. She told him she had come for him, but not as a hunter. She was a contractor, sent by a rival organization to eliminate the very same man who was hunting Elijah, a mercenary named Sylvan. She had been tracking him, but Sylvan had proven more cunning, turning a trap she had laid for him back on her with brutal efficiency. Their enemy was a shared one. Their methods, as evidenced by the weapons he had found on her, were cut from the same shadowy cloth. A heavy, palpable distrust hung in the air between them, thick as the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. They were two scorpions in a bottle, each knowing the other's sting could be fatal. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the same cold weighing of risks and benefits that was running through his own mind. She was a liability, a wild card, a potential betrayer. But she was also something he had not had in a very long time, a source of information, a pair of eyes to watch his back, and a skilled hand in a fight. The choice before them was stark, stripped of all pleasantries. It was a simple, brutal equation of survival. They could join their fractured, suspicious forces, pooling their knowledge and their skills against a common, extraordinarily dangerous foe. Or they could remain separate, two solitary targets for a killer who had already proven he could find them, stalk them, and strike without a sound. To go it alone was almost certainly a death sentence for each of them. To ally was to enter a pact with a devil he didn't know, a gamble where the stakes were their lives. He looked at her, at the defiant set of her mouth despite her pain, and knew that the lonely, running path he had been on was no longer an option. The game had changed, and the rules now demanded an uneasy, dangerous partnership. They abandoned the ranch to the ghosts and the gathering dust, turning their backs on the only semblance of shelter Elijah had known in years. Their path led them across a vast, dried-up salt lake, a blinding expanse of cracked white earth that stretched to the horizon like a shattered mirror. The air was still and heavy, the silence oppressive. Sylvan did not keep them waiting. The first sign of his presence was a dead raven, placed neatly in the center of their path. Its black feathers were pristine, its neck broken with clinical precision. It was not a threat, it was a statement. A few hours later, a sudden, deafening explosion erupted 100 yards to their left, hurling a geyser of salt, rock, and dust into the sky. The concussion wave hit them like a physical blow. He wasn't trying to kill them. Not yet. He was playing, a cat testing its prey, stretching out the moment before the kill to savor the tension. He was exhausting their nerves, demonstrating his superior position and his intimate knowledge of their movements. Elijah and Isabella moved like two hunted animals, their senses stretched to a razor's edge. They developed a grim, unspoken rhythm, one scanning the high ground while the other watched the flanks, their progress a slow, cautious dance across the treacherous landscape. They were hunter and prey in turns, but the true hunter remained always just out of sight, a puppeteer pulling their strings. They learned to read the signs he left for them, the perverse language of his passage. A specific branch would be snapped at eye level, pointing in the direction they were traveling. A single, smooth stone would be balanced perfectly on the trunk of a fallen juniper tree. A pattern of 3 small rocks would be arranged in a loose triangle near a potential campsite. Each mark was a message, a taunt. Asterisk, I was here. I am ahead of you. I know your route. Asterisk, it was a one-sided conversation, a demonstration of total control that was more unnerving than any direct attack. One night, they took shelter in a shallow cave, a dark scar in the side of a rocky hill. A small, carefully shielded fire cast flickering shadows on the walls. Isabella stared into the flames, her good arm wrapped around her knees. Her voice, when it came, was low and devoid of its usual edge, filled with a weary respect that bordered on dread. She said that Sylvan was not merely a mercenary. In their shadowy world, he was a legend, a ghost who never left traces unless he wanted to, a man who took more pleasure in the intricate dance of the hunt, in the psychological dismantling of his targets, than in the final, messy conclusion. He was an artist, and death was his brushstroke. Elijah listened, the words settling into him like stones in a still pond. For years, his primary emotion had been a sharp, vigilant fear, the instinct of a rabbit that knows the hawk is circling. But as Isabella spoke of Sylvan's reputation, something shifted deep within him. The cold knot of fear began to dissolve, replaced by a different, more formidable emotion, a cold, relentless fury. It was a clean, sharp anger that burned away the lingering traces of his paralysis. He was tired of running, tired of jumping at shadows, tired of being the mouse in this twisted game orchestrated by a man who saw him as nothing more than a moving target for his amusement. The anger solidified into a hard, unyielding resolve. The next time they found one of Sylvan's signs, a feather impaled on a cactus thorn, Elijah didn't just note it and move on. He stopped, studied it, and then deliberately crushed the feather in his fist. It was a small, futile gesture, but it was his. He was done being the prey. The game was still on, but the mouse had just decided to grow teeth. They made the decision that broke the pattern of their flight. They would stop running and turn to face the storm. Using the frayed remnants of Isabella's network and Elijah's hard-earned knowledge of the territory, they laid a trap, baiting Sylvan toward a ghost town, a skeleton of a silver mining settlement nestled in the barren hills. The ruins became their chosen arena, a place of broken dreams and crumbling walls. As dusk began to bleed the color from the sky, they separated, melting into the skeleton of the town. Elijah took position in the old post office, its roof half gone, the front wall pockmarked with age and neglect. Isabella settled across the wide, dirt main street in the former manager's office, a slightly more substantial structure with a clear line of sight. They were 2 points of a triangle waiting for its apex. Sylvan arrived with the twilight. He did not creep or skulk. He walked down the center of the main street as if he owned the ruins. his dark coat flowing around him like a shadow given form. He was tall and lean, his movements fluid and unervingly economical, devoid of any wasted energy. He came to a halt in the very center of the town, a statue of calm menace, and slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the broken buildings. He knew they were there. The duel began, but it was not a contest of bullets, not at first. It was a battle of wits, a deadly chess game played in 3 dimensions with real lives. Sylvan moved like a phantom, dissolving into the deepening shadows. He utilized a network of old mine shafts and crumbling connecting walls, his presence announced only by the faint scuff of a boot on gravel or the fleeting glimpse of movement in a broken window. He cornered Elijah in the post office basement, a low-ceilinged space filled with rotten timber and the stench of decay. Elijah found his retreat cut off, the silhouette of his hunter blocking the only exit. But before Sylvan could strike, a sharp crack echoed from across the street. Isabella, from her perch, had fired not to hit, but to distract. The bullet sparked off a metal beam near Sylvan's head. In the split second his attention wavered, Elijah lunged not forward, but sideways into a collapsed tunnel, escaping the trap. The response was immediate and terrifying. A volley of fire from Sylvan's rifle sent the remaining windows in Isabella's building exploding inward in a shower of glittering, deadly shards. The night became a tapestry of violence woven with threads of gunfire, long silences, and the sounds of their desperate movement. They fought him through the ruins, a brutal, exhausting game of cat and mouse where the roles constantly reversed. Elijah, leveraging his knowledge of the terrain, managed to flank Sylvan near the old assay office, his shot grazing the mercenary's arm, a dark bloom appearing on the dark fabric. But their victories were costly. A near miss from Sylvan's rifle sent brick fragments flying, one catching Elijah a glancing blow on the temple, sending him stumbling, blood trickling down his face. During a tactical retreat, Isabella misjudged a crumbling staircase, the wood giving way beneath her and twisting her ankle with a sickening crunch. By the time the first hints of dawn tinged the eastern sky with a pale, sickly gray, a stalemate had settled over the ghost town. The 3 of them were wounded, exhausted, and locked in a fragile, bloody equilibrium. Their forces were equal, their positions known. The next move was a mystery, the outcome uncertain. It was then, as they each caught their breath in separate ruins, that Elijah's eyes, scanning the horizon out of habit, caught sight of it. A thick, black column of smoke was rising into the morning air, a dark stain against the pale sky. It came from the direction of the Crossroads Ranch. The sight was a physical blow, a sudden, violent shift in the landscape of their conflict. The carefully balanced scales of their standoff were suddenly irrevocably kicked aside by an unforeseen event. The ranch was burning. They abandoned their carefully laid ambush in the ghost town, their personal war forgotten in the face of the ominous black pillar staining the sky. They rode hard, pushing their exhausted horses, a sense of dreadful certainty growing with each passing mile. The Crossroads Ranch was an inferno. The barn, the main house, the shed where Elijah had slept, everything was consumed by a roaring, hungry fire that painted the surrounding landscape in flickering shades of orange and hellish red. The heat was immense, a physical wall that pushed back against them. And there, in the midst of this self-created hell, sitting calmly on a crate by the well as if waiting for guests, was Sylvan. He was unarmed. His hands rested on his knees, the wound on his arm neatly bandaged with a clean, white cloth. His face, seen clearly for the first time, was not that of a monster, but of a man well into his middle years, with intelligent, profoundly weary eyes that held a universe of pain. He made no move to fight. Instead, his gaze locked with Elijah's, and he tossed a single, aged piece of paper into the dust at their feet. It was a brittle, yellowed order, its edges crumbling, bearing the official seal of an organization Elijah had tried to erase from his memory. It was an execution order for an entire intelligence network, a network Elijah had once been part of, and in the space designated for the operative assigned to carry out the grim task was a signature. His signature. Isabella stood frozen beside him, her sharp intake of breath audible even over the crackle of the flames. Her mind, trained for deception and tactical lies, was reeling, trying to process this sudden, shocking shift in the narrative. Sylvan slowly raised his empty hands, palms open, in a gesture of surrender. But it was not a surrender to their weapons. It was a surrender to the truth. The hunt was over. He was not a hunter. He was an avenger. He was the sole survivor of that very network, the one whose wife and children had been obliterated on the direct orders of the man whose name was on that paper. The entire pursuit, the years of stalking, the psychological torment, it had all been an act of retribution, a debt collected in blood and fear. Elijah stood rooted to the spot, the world narrowing to the 3 points of a devastating triangle. The burning ruins of his brief refuge, the face of the man he had feared for so long, and the shocked expression of the woman who had become his unlikely ally. The carefully constructed walls around his past, the brand of the lone fugitive he had worn for years, shattered into a million pieces. He had lived by one unbreakable rule: never look back. Now, the past had not only caught up, it had set his present on fire. The weight of the rifle in his hand suddenly felt alien, wrong. His fingers loosened, and the weapons but settled into the dust. He had not given that order. The signature was a masterful forgery, a piece of bureaucratic murder designed to bury the truth and pin the blame on a convenient pawn. But he knew, with a chilling clarity, who had. He knew the men in the shadows, the architects of betrayal, who had turned him into a weapon and then into a scapegoat. The paralyzing fear that had driven him for years evaporated, burned away in the heat of the ranch's destruction. In its place rose a cold, focused, and limitless fury. He looked from Sylvan's weary, resolute face to Isabella's, which was now shifting from shock to a dawning, grim understanding. They were no longer hunter, target, and rival. They were 3 people shattered by the same hidden hands, their lives broken by the same conspiracy. An alliance, forged in blood and fire, was born in that moment without a single word being spoken. The hunt was indeed over. The running had finally ceased. But it was not the end. It was the beginning. A new path stretched before Elijah, not into the shadows of hiding, but into the heart of the darkness that had created him. He was going to war,